I'm with a gentleman who has stood for the States. How many times?
3 times so far.
3 times. Better introduce yourself. Your name is?
My name is Phil Maguire.
Phil Maguire. And what sort of, where you are today with now, because when you last stood for the States, there weren't parties, there were one party. Mm-hmm. Does it make any difference to your view of politics now, the fact that there's now parties, more parties?
No, I still personally think that somebody has to be too weak to stand up on their own merit if they're going to join a party and need support. And the problem I've always said about parties is they are, by their very nature, conflictive and divisive. You can only need to see that over the last Rishi Sunak issue, right, when nobody turned around and said, well, thank you very much for doing that, that's really great that you're putting 15 billion into the economy. They all had to say, oh no, we thought of it first and this is a terrible idea. How are you going to run a country if you can't collaborate? And the problem is that we're now splitting into all these little parties, and I have no idea what they actually are in differences.
Well, the 3 main new parties, they could, I mean, 2 of them have amalgamated anyway, they've done that anyway. It wouldn't make any difference if all 3 joined together, would it? It wouldn't. It really wouldn't.
Well, I'm presuming that the Reform is slightly to the left, although I don't know how much to the left, and I presume that the Liberal Conservatives and the Alliance are slightly to the right. But what does that really mean in practical terms?
Well,
you know,
whenever an issue pops up, like whether it's COVID or something, they have to scratch their heads, and which box are they going to dip into? The socialist box or the arch Tory box? Which one are they going to dip into to know what to guide them to what they should do? It's a strange scenario, isn't it?
And even when it comes to local things, if let's say like in St Clement, where we can vote in a Reform member, Alliance member, and a Liberal Conservative. What does it mean? Are they going to stand on those manifestos or as deputies for our parish when it comes to making decisions about the parish? And a classic one that everyone has got a hot button on is further development. Mm. I mean, if the Alliance choose, for example, to say we need further development, which I believe they have, and Reform,
but not in my parish, because they're all assuming a parish identity because that's where they're placed. They're all parish representatives, and it's forcing them into that cul-de-sac, isn't it? They can't have an all-in view on housing, really, because at the end of the day, who's going to finish up with the housing?
Precisely, and we've had a classic example of that with Richard Renouf, who is a deputy of Saint Juan, and he's been deciding health policies for the last 4 years badly, in my opinion. And there's nothing anyone can do about it, right, apart from the people of St. Juan's. And now even they can't do anything about it because they haven't really stood.
Well, this business about joining several parishes, 2 or 3 or parishes together, that is going to lead to problems in itself, isn't it? Because some people will want to own him as their deputy for their parish, mm-hmm, and the issues might be totally contrary to what the other parishes want, won't they? So you're going to be split down the middle, or well, there will be several of them. It won't be only one deputy. That's I suppose on the plus side. But if you haven't, because there are some instances where the people who are standing in it don't live in any of the parishes, so they've got no allegiance. And everybody likes to claim an allegiance. So I was born here. My granny used to go to school here. Mm-hmm. All that stuff, all that nonsense.
To make them one of the boys, as it were.
Yes, it's very. It's doing something I wanted to do for years. That is, take apart the parish system, but it's going to do it before our very eyes. It's going to happen.
Well, I have a very what can I say, ambivalent view to the parish system. As far as I'm concerned, it worked brilliantly before cars turned up, because the island was then split into a manageable distance that you could walk to your parish hall and participate in your parish. And of course the cars made a nonsense of that, because you can get from one side of the island to the other in half an hour. And so it's at that point we should start thinking more of it as an island. After all the problems we are facing are problems we are facing as an island, not as parishes. And my complaint about the latest development in this area is by getting rid of any kind of island mandate, we've now dumbed down democracy to its lowest common denominator. I was talking to Deputy Ash about this only the other month. I said the problem is that people don't expect deputy to do very much, so it's all parochial stuff. Last hustings in 2018, one of the people, I remember them vividly, standing up was worried about the amount of dog feces at Green Island. That was the big burning issue for him. Right. And I'm thinking, we're facing all these problems, and that's the one that's burning him. And
a lot of it, I mean, of course, they become real issues for individuals at a very local level. I mean, traffic calming, I don't know how many will be... That was always a big issue. They want traffic. So who could out-calm the traffic? Who could be the most outspoken on that issue? That was sort of level. But they loved to... At the other extreme, people like one of the pretenders, Sir Philip, for example, he likes to call Jersey a nation state. He loves to do that. So to give it an international... So what? So it's a nation state. So what are your policies for a nation state?
So does that mean that we kick out the territorials and set up our own militia? Not a bad idea.
These things are not...
The 5 million would do something for the island.
I keep trying to raise these things on Facebook, but people don't bite. They don't think they... I mean, it's a bit unkind of me to do it, because obviously they're not a problem at the moment. They've got a little militia unit or whatever they call it, and it tugs along, but... They're unlikely to be called up to go and fight in Ukraine, aren't they? It's unlikely.
Yeah, but if there was another problem with Jersey, facing Jersey,
right,
they'd do exactly what they did last time, and they'd leave the island, because they're not our army.
That's right.
They're British.
That's right.
So they'd leave. So we're paying all this money for something that's not working.
That's right.
I'm not going to suggest that it doesn't benefit the island in small, minor ways where having this kind of presence might actually do something useful. But in real terms, we're paying for defence that we're not going to get, and that's the case to me of shouldn't we be doing something about that? That's our money.
Well, the main industry, they've got this huge blocks on what are huge in Jersey standards, an international finance centre. Well, they start off with the word international again. It's not a local finance centre, it's an international one. So the money they're deriving, money they're seeking, is worldwide. So you can't do that on a... If you're appointed or elected as a parish deputy or even a constable, you've got no mandate really to talk about it, have you? How do you fit it into your mandate if you're that localised?
Precisely, and the fact is, to be fair... And people focus on these tiny little things because they feel that at least their voice will be heard. And I think that's a very sad indictment of where we've got in democracy, where people are just not worried about the major things that are going on in the world because they feel that somehow, because it's out of their control, they shouldn't worry about it. And it's like, you have no idea about the forces moving around the island that are going to decide our lives.
Well, just a little dispute over fishing, for example. I mean,
oh, that's just so wonderfully French, isn't it?
Which still hasn't been resolved, but there could be serious consequences from that, which would go way beyond fishing, if somebody wants to make a point about it, can't they?
Well, it's only become a serious consequence because we've left the EU, because ironically we're just following EU guidance on this. The fishing permits we're issuing are because the EU want us to, and we're quite happy to comply. And the French are complaining because their own government, the EU, has insisted they do this.
But unfortunately, because the EU starts, since we go to Saint-Malo, we're into EU land, and different rules can apply. They can't, we can't unload that car here, sir. You haven't got a Schengen agreement or whatever. If you buy a house over there, we're going to possess your house. Mm-hmm. Anything is possible.
Yes.
And what can we do about it? Nothing.
Well, personally, I think we should just switch off the electricity and start producing our own again, and then see how much EDF moans about the loss of their earnings. Right. And then we should take them to court in Britain, where EDF is trying to put a footprint, and then see how much they like that.
I mean, somebody, a naive person, maybe 10 years out of school, will present themselves for election, and they could be the person who's negotiating on Jersey's behalf, couldn't they? It can happen.
Without any idea of the historical basis or even the reason why we're doing it.
Exactly.
And yes, and in one respect, if that were to happen, well, we deserved it, because if we are taking these kind of people on instead of serious candidates, and this is the complaint I've had about our system all the time, is that we do get serious and valuable candidates. I've run against some. My very first time I stood for deputy, there was a particular doctor who stood with me who I thought was a brilliant candidate.
Right.
But he got what he thought was a humiliating number of votes and has stepped down. And the fact he got more than me, I thought was indicative that he had a good standing. But people like that just say, "Oh well, I gave it a go," and
Right.
the number of people. It's like last time I talked to the Reform candidates, Chloe Freeman and Samantha Morton, and I said, "Whatever happens here, you are going to continue the good fight." And they said, "Oh yes." Well, where are they?
Well, this is one of the features of Jersey politics. You get people, oh, it's a good idea. So I think I'll stand for the States, with no political provenance whatsoever. It done nothing. Of course, they come to and they say, well, they've been doing charitable works and all that sort of thing, if they've been doing charitable works. But there's no political history to them, is there? And when they lose, don't get elected, they disappear again. They're not going around campaigning. Because I have campaigned all my life, it's nothing new for me. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't. But for lots of people, it isn't. It doesn't come naturally, does it?
Well, this is where the parties should come to the fore. Then that's their power base. They should be promoting and growing valid candidates by teaching them that it's not just an election every 4 years. It's everything in between.
Exactly.
But they're not doing it.
Well,
I mean, the alliance has been around, what, 6 months?
That's right.
You know, we're a brand new party. Yes,
Well,
you are. So what the hell have you done?
Where's the provenance for them? That's what I say. If you have, I mean, like reformers, I've spoken to people and said, why, way back, I mean, 4 years ago, we knew there was going to be another election now. So why haven't they got a structure where they've got somebody who is their social security spokesperson? Make it look like a party. Make it behave. So you've got people who are experts in their field. But they don't do that. They're still waiting to see who's going to get the Christmas present of being a minister. They don't have any practice at it, do they?
Well, not only that, but they don't actually even try to help people at a grassroots level, as far as I know. I haven't heard of anyone saying, oh, I had a problem with Social Security and they fixed it.
They're very reluctant.
And why not? That's the kind of thing you need to do to prove that you are worthy of power.
Well, this is what it's all about. My representative, I mean, the word tells you what they're supposed to do, doesn't it? Represent people. But where do they represent people? And I must say, I think the worst of the three, as was, senators, deputies, was the constables, because you'd never see them in a work tribunal or any of those things. They never were, or an appeal against a planning decision. I did attend one where the constable himself was at Grouville many years ago, when his little house he got a planning refusal, and he was trying to complain through a complaints board. He was having to represent himself, which was rather novel. I thought it was very good. But generally, they don't help their constituents. Or in fact, they don't even help. Again, another problem with Jersey is you get this conflict because they say, oh, I'm on that committee, I can't appeal that, and all that goes on. So to find somebody who's free enough to be able to do it for you is quite difficult. To actually find a representative is quite difficult.
And then people will turn around to him and say, well, you obviously aren't on a committee or anything, so therefore you have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly.
What? The problem is, when it comes down to it, is we have this great big blustery government form that we don't need. We're 100,000 people-ish. Do we really need, 47 representatives and all this structure? If we were on the mainland, we would be a small town and we would elect a mayor and his group.
That's right. Well, this is Jersey really, it isn't really sustainable to have self-government, really. It isn't. That's my view. It's survived being some sort of self-government. But whether it can carry on, I've no idea. Obviously, when I'm dead and buried, they'll be laughing at me and saying, well, we're still here. But I can't... In the UK, the structure you described, local councils, they've got that level. But they do have Westminster who sets the trend, who sets the legislation. and there is all the mayors and all that stuff. Of course, they did have the European Union dimension as well, so there are all these representatives. That's gone, but still the European Union is having an influence on what can happen.
Sure.
Because if you don't comply with certain European Union regulations on things, data protection and that sort of thing, you can't trade with European Union countries. So they might think you've left them all behind, but we haven't.
No, not in the slightest. But my argument would be that the island needs a self-governing body, because who else is going to look after it? Now we've left the EU protection, what little there was of it. We're going to find the waters outside the EU very cold, because of our main industry, which is finance. And that's just one of the areas, and don't even get me started on trusts and how suspect some of those are.
In that little reddish coloured booklet you've got in front of you at St Clement, there's a great contest going to take place, because you've got two sirs who both want to be they want to be chief minister. Mm-hmm. Now one of those, who's been around a bit longer than the other one of his themes was independent Jersey. That was one of his themes. We're quite strong on that. Now, obviously, he could see some of these problems. His judicial background, he wasn't stupid. He could see that there could be a crunch, and it can still happen. The crunch can still happen. So they might be forced into it. You think?
Oh, yes. I think the history of our alliance with Britain has told us that they cannot be trusted, and that they would give us up at an instant if they felt it was necessary. I mean, technically, we only existed for the last, how long have we been in? 72, 40 odd years, because we were London's dirty little secrets. We could do the stuff in our place that London was no longer allowed to do because it was part of the EU.
That's right.
Well, now they're not part of the EU, so they can get on and do these things.
That's right.
And what are they going to say? Thank you, we're going to continue our business here, or not? Well, which way do you think they would go?
It is. Well, this is, I mean, how it works at high level in finance, I don't know. So some financiers seem to think it's advantageous not to have, I mean, they've always existed with a vague link with the European Union. But if it becomes even more vague with London, the City of London not being so closely attached to the European Union, that might create bigger problems than they've had before. And also, the other thing is that, of course, that we are, like lots of little islands around the world, the overseas territories are having problems as well. So I always think the British government doesn't want to pick up the price tag for looking after all these little places, does it?
Well, yes. Although they seem to be faring a lot better than we do, because it always annoys me when there's a blacklist and places like Liechtenstein and Cayman Islands are on them.
Exactly.
And their residents go, oh dear, we're on another blacklist. Oh well, let's make a couple million. We get the hints of being put on a blacklist, and we'll bend over backwards to prevent it. And yet our finance industry is contracting year upon year.
Well, from where I sit, it appears to be, but then I'm not involved in it, so I don't really know. I don't know. They still seem to be recruiting people. But then you can have, you see, I've never quite understood the arrangement, because you can have Jersey lawyers using Jersey as a base, and they can be in the Seychelles, and they can be anywhere, in fact, and they've still got presumably the same name board up. Fred Smith from Jersey. You see, I don't.
Well, the EU tried to stamp down on this, and this is something that we still have to think about, which is that they said, no, if you're centred in a place, you ought to have enough of a substance there to demonstrate that you are, in this case, Jersey. But of course, trust companies over here are getting around it by having an official trust company with all their Jersey directors and that, and then having a separate company that isn't a trust company, that's their management company that outsources. And so they don't have to be Jersey.
They don't.
And they're going to the Malaysian islands and so forth for outsourcing.
That's right.
As we speak.
Outsourcing was a big thing many years ago when Frank Walker was chief minister. He was very keen on outsourcing because they didn't want the people here to outsource and they couldn't house them. Outsourcing them to the Isle of Man was a favourite, but I haven't heard that song being played for a long time.
Well, now because we see the effects of it, where jobs are. It was okay when it was the minor jobs, but there are now whole departments in the Isle of Man, right. And now there are whole sections. It's so fascinating for me to see buildings that used to be filled with banks are now empty and doing other things. And nobody seems to worry about this.
They don't,
it's all fine.
Right.
It's all fine. No, it isn't all
It can't
fine.
possibly collapse. But international efforts, international reforms do affect Jersey. They must affect, because they're forever saying they're having to upgrade their standard of respectability. They're having to do it. I mean, the charitable law that came in here to regularise charities. Now, because trusts, a lot of things are charitable trusts, because trusts were a main part of the finance industry, it was partly to do with regularising the commercial trusts in the eyes of the world. So they had a degree of respectability about them. But I've heard nothing about that for several years. I don't know what's happened to that aspect of the trust, of the charitable law. I don't know where it went.
Well, we have a commissioner who is supposed to be looking into this, costing us £1 million a year. Yeah. And nothing. I haven't heard a word from him.
Well, all I hear is about his activities with charitable activities, the pet dog fund and all that sort of stuff, and some genuine things, obviously, some genuine trust. In fact, a more and more reliance upon charitable activities to provide the things which government aren't supplying, which is another shocking. Dangerous aspect of it.
It's absolutely shocking.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know where to start with that. I mean, the very fact that they say, oh, well, charities ought to fill in, so we don't have to spend that money. Well, great. Well, where does that money go? Well, it goes into a great big funnel called the civil service.
Right. Sure.
To fund what and who and where. And yet, and then we're finding that people are having to rely on charities for basic requirements.
And of course, they are basically run by volunteers. And what's happening is little charities are being, you're clever, you understand this system. Would you like to run this bit of part of the system for us? But you have to be on a contract. You'll have to have a contract. You'll have to have insurance. And then so it becomes that they're not a little charity anymore. They're a little business. It starts to become a business. And every 12 months, they have to renew their contract. It kills, as I've said many times. It will kill charity, the whole ethical standard of charity. And of course, they can't find the volunteers. Volunteers are in so much demand here.
Oh, yes.
And
but this is something, in fact, I took to the Jersey Association of Charities over here. Was it Jersey Charities Association? I can't remember which way round it goes.
Association of Jersey Charities. Yeah.
Thank you. And I said, look, this is a real problem. And the problem is that smaller charities have this huge burden on them that's unfair, that the bigger charities can handle because they're getting the money. I said, why didn't you take it over and offer it to them as a service? Yeah. And they said, oh, we're not interested in doing that. Well, you've got 300,000 sitting in a bank account given to you by the states. That's right. From lottery fees. Some of that could actually go towards funding these kind of regulations to make sure that your members are on par without it burdening the members.
Insofar as we're involved in this election, little corner of St Clement, which keeps surprising me that it's the smallest parish in the island. I can never believe that. But anyway, it is. It's the smallest one. We're going to have the chief minister, according to the way it is. We've got 2 chief ministers waiting to get elected. What can happen to St Clement? I mean, there's housing and housing and housing, but there's no soul to St Clement, is there? There's no village, is there? Not to speak of.
Well, I had a horrifying vision of what's going to happen to St Clement's in 2018.
Right.
If you remember, Sarah Ferguson was talking about population growth and said if we don't keep control of it, in 2030 we'll need something like 120 new Lamare parks and 6 new schools. And she gave this message at every single parish hustings, and the only one she ever got any reaction from was St Clement's, because we know what Lamare is like. Right. And we're like, oh God, no, not more. Right. And I wondered I thought this was obviously just because they didn't understand what Lamare was, until I had the interview on BBC Radio, and I mentioned that if we're going to build all these houses, where they're going to build them, because St Clement's is almost full. And they said, well, that's not the attitude. You ought to be doing your bit for the island. And I'm like, we've done our bit for the island. Yes. We continue. We've only got 4 fields left. What the hell do you expect? And I suddenly realised that the reason nobody else was interested is because they believed that they could build those 120 Lamare blocks here. And they wouldn't surprise me if they start knocking down buildings to build more flats.
Absolutely, well, they're bound to. They're bound to.
And why? Who's going to buy them? Who's going to live in them? What are they going to do?
Exactly.
And when I ask questions like that, I get this silence.
Have you read the manifestos that are in the St Clement's brochure that's come through?
I have.
Have you? I mean, I don't ask you if any of them appeal to you, but are there any glimmers of reality there?
Well, the problem you have with such a thing as this is you're only allowed a certain number of words.
Right.
And how can you put forward any feasible arguments in those times? Especially when there are so many problems that the island is facing.
Right. Big problems.
Big problems.
For a little island. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, they're the same for everyone. They're around the world. We're all for suffering the same problems. Even a tedious thing like waste management,
Right.
which is not the most exciting thing, is a problem we all have to face. We all have to find a way of doing that.
Well, I've noticed, I've been trying to read through the whole 93 manifesto, but it's a bit heavy going. But I'm looking at the newcomers especially, and the climate problem, if there is a problem, which I think there is, but nobody can really tackle it. Nobody. I haven't heard of Mr. Jones. He's always very astute on such things. In St. Peter, isn't he? Or St. Bernard. I think he's St. Bernard. I can't remember. But that isn't the general feeling. It doesn't feature very highly in most manifestos.
The problem is, if the sea level is going to rise, what can we really do about it?
Well, St. Clement's has had it, hasn't it? I mean,
not just St. Clement's, but I mean the whole of the south of of Jersey is under threat. If there's even a modicum of sea level, I mean, and we have historical evidence of fossil beaches going as high as 90 feet above present sea level. Well, if that happens, there's nothing you could do about it.
When I first came to Jersey in 1966, it was quite a normal thing for the town to be flooded. That wasn't unusual at all.
I used to live in Tamarick Street, right. And we could always tell when winter came because the sandbags would go up at the end of the road. Right. And, it was common. Yeah. But then we didn't moan about it because we understood we were on reclaimed land. Right. So the sea just was getting back occasionally. But of course, if the whole sea level rises, then that's an unmanageable problem in a lot of ways because you certainly can't deal with it on a parish level. I mean, if we decided to build our sea walls up, then all what would happen is if Grouville and St. Saviour and St. Helier didn't do the same, is it'll only come around the edges. Yeah. So we need to act as an island on these kind of things, and we're not doing that because we're breaking up into divisions and the parties and the getting rid of the senators and these silly super parishes are all designed to have us fighting amongst ourselves.
You stood for senator.
I stood for senator, yes, because I felt an island-wide mandate was more important.
Right. Well, at least it allows you to have a free hand in what policies you have. You've got an all-island opportunity to afford anything you like. I mean, you can talk on something like Plemont, even though Plemont, strictly speaking, was a parish issue, because the piece of land was in one parish. So it becomes an all-island issue when it comes to the financing of it, doesn't it? You've got to buy it or do something with it. So what is a parish issue becomes all island, doesn't it?
Well, the big question is, what is not a parish issue? Yes, we have these parishes, but what's solely going to affect one section of Jersey and not everything else? Right. And the answer is nothing, because we all live in one world, for goodness sake. Right. I mean, this idea of somehow, this parish matters in this way and this parish matters... No, they should all either be working together or they will destroy each other. And the system we're developing is designed to destroy us. Yes.
Have you seen when there's a public meeting to take place for St. Clement?
Yes, 7th of June.
7th of June. You'll be there, of course.
I shall be there.
Of course. And I expect you're preparing your questions already.
I don't know what really to ask them.
I know.
Because really, what can you say? If you turn around and say to because you've got to make a question for everyone, so you can't just talk about parties. No. So how are you going to ask a question that's valid to both parties and independents when no one really has a clear idea of what they need to do on these things. Or shall I say they haven't made it clear in this.
No.
Now, I've gone to some of the websites in the
Right.
hope that I get more information out. And some of them do have a bit more information. But when it comes to practical policies, nobody wants to say because they know that it will upset someone.
You see, the trouble is the Boris example in the UK. Your manifesto has to be 3 words and no more. You can get it done, and it seems to be quite sufficient to deal with it, or whatever he was saying. Just 3 words seems to be sufficient.
Well, as a tagline, yeah, okay, or as a concept of what we're trying to do. I mean, the classic one is the Americans make America great again.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it's great.
It's great.
And you know, you can get behind that, but then you go, okay, how? And there's suddenly the sound of grasshoppers and you know,
right.
and you're like, well, okay, if you have something of value that you need to say it clearly.
If I understood computers a bit better, I'd go through the 93 manifestos and see how alike they actually are, their priorities, like solve the housing problem, solve the homelessness problem, build the hospital, don't build the hospital. But they come in almost the same order when you look at their manifestos. And people are saying much the same, but very little suggestion of how you can do these things.
And some of these examples some of these ideas of what you could do are really simple, like education. Let's learn from Finland, the best educational environment in the world, for year after year after year. And we send people there year after year, and they come back and say, we have learned valuable lessons. No, you haven't, because you're not doing anything. Let's do something. And you could just say, well, let's follow Finland in this, and let's follow, I think it's Denmark, isn't it? That's supposed to be the happiest place in the world. Well, let's learn why and see if we can apply. Let's just copy people who are working, but the idea of copying people seems to be so abhorrent to us.
People have been quite keen to copy Guernsey, which is quite a revelation, isn't it? Because they managed to bring in this all-island vote, you know, and it worked. They did it. We thought, well, couldn't possibly work, but so far it has. And it appears to be a much more fair system.
Well, I've been saying to people, you know, week on week we decide who's going to get on strictly across 60 million people, and you're telling us as an island we can't get together and organise one every 4 years. Who's going to run their things? Oh, there'd be too much choice. You know, what if we had to choose between all 93? Well, there wouldn't be all 93.
No, it wouldn't.
You know, if we went for a basic committee system, as in a local town, you'd be looking at, 8 positions, so there'd be 3 or 4 people each. That's 30 people. Where we used to have that many standing for senator, at one point. So it's not impossible. It's just that people are sort of like, oh no, we're just so big and we're so complicated and we're so important. No, we are not. And we got to learn that we can't trust in other people to defend our back. We have to look after ourselves. So we have to start thinking about how we're going to survive in the rest of the 21st century.
If you were to predict 4 years' time, what will the elections look like then, do you think?
Well, I have done so. In my opinion, what will happen is there'll be the finance industry will move further out the island.
Right.
That will then lead to a housing surplus, more so than the 4,000 we've already got, and that will then cause the construction industry to falter because they won't be able to sell houses. So the construction industry, which is our second biggest employer after the States, will then collapse. Forcing more houses onto the market, forcing more people to leave. So in 4 years' time, we could very well see an island population of 30,000 as people leave us in droves.
I used to ask, what is the minimum population Jersey needs? Because obviously people have an aspiration of a certain style of life. But what's the minimum number to maintain that? And it's, I don't know, how many less than 100,000 you can run with it, I don't know.
Well, I did have an argument of this very point with ex-deputy Guy Dufay.
Oh, really?
Because we were talking about what levels of population we'd like to see, and I said, well, anything lower than 75,000 as far as I'm concerned, because I think when we reach that level, that's when we started getting all the additional problems. And he said, well, we did a report, and we set it at 87,000. I said, well, I'd be happy to work with anyone to get it down to 87,000. He said, oh, well, you're changing tack. I mean, no, I've got to get it down to 87,000 to get it down to 75. So if you want a lower population, I'll help you do it. The problem is that we need to completely reverse our immigration policy, because our policy at the moment is sheer madness. If you're a person of quality with a professional qualification, you can only come to the island and pursue your career for 3 years. Then you either have to give up your career to get an unqualified job to stay in Jersey or leave. Well, what self-respecting professional?
I thought it was quite remarkable that the greffier left so at all because he couldn't get housing calls. Well, that is ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, the system doesn't operate if it hasn't got a greffier, does it?
But the ludicrous thing is, you can step onto this island off a plane or off a boat without a job, without a place to stay, with no money in your pocket, and no prospects, no skill sets, with a substance addiction and a criminal record, and stay here as long as you like. Well, that's just madness.
Yeah, I rather suspect I might disagree with you if we develop that argument.
By all means.
You're obviously a fan of work permit systems.
I'm a fan of the Australian point system,
right.
And I think we should introduce something like that. And then having got people in, we should give them the chance to stay longer if they're contributing to the island. See, no problem with that. But the idea that we try and keep away people who could actually solve our problems, while introducing anybody off the boat who can do it, who basically.
Well, unfortunately, the island, as it's now structured, desperately needs people who can do basic labouring jobs, picking potatoes or whatever it is, and you need those people. As it's structured, I don't personally think agriculture is by any means as important as they say. There's land there which could be used for other purposes. With a population of over 100,000. With a population less than 100,000, you probably wouldn't need the land anyway.
Well, I'm afraid I've been very unsympathetic to farmers. I said the problem and the reason they can't find people is because they're not prepared to pay them. And they've got away with years of paying people horrendous amounts and making them live in squalor while they're over here.
That's right.
And now they're not interested because they can get better jobs in Poland. Well, God bless them. So either you pay them a decent wage or you get out of farming, in my opinion, which is not a very popular opinion, as you can imagine. But
no, well,
it's the same with the retail and hospitality.
Lots of basic jobs. They got the same thing.
The people who complain about the lack of retail and hospitality jobs are the very people who aren't paying them.
That's right.
You know, there was a JP front page news article some time back about two businesses in St Albans moaning that they couldn't get staff, and I thought that's funny because all the other restaurants around them are complaining because they pay, and these two are notorious bad payers, and suddenly they're not complaining anymore because now they're paying, and this whole idea that we can get in immigrants from all over the place who are used to not earning money and pay them a pittance.
What surprises me is that I'm from the UK, obviously, I've been here a long time, that more people from the UK don't complain because they have to suffer this same shoddy accommodation. They have to go through all the same process for 10 years before they get their calls. I'm surprised more people from the UK haven't said, well, we're British. But no, they don't, do they, for some reason?
Yes, you're quite right. It's just bizarre. I mean, after all, they moan about everything else, so you'd think they'd moan about this too. But yes, I don't know, maybe we should start asking people from England why they put up with this nonsense.
Yes, I think we should. I think we'll stop here. I think we've rambled on enough. If you have any more thoughts, do when this gets published, do make them known.
Oh right, you mean in the comments page or something, or?
Yeah, whatever. Do you look at them? Do you look at Facebook and such things?
I try not to look at Facebook, but I certainly look at YouTube.
You'll have to. Well, these go up on YouTube. The technical process is they have to go on YouTube. Then I can put them wherever, or anybody else wants to use it and share it, and say how awful you are.
Well, That'd be nice. I mean, what's it that Oscar Wilde says? The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
Okay. Well,
and it'd be great if people had an opinion, or rather.
Well, I try to provoke on
opinion.
it. I do try to get Facebook discussions, but it's incredibly difficult. It generally just resolves into a sort of spitefulness battle, which is very strange. I don't understand it.
That's the nature of the internet. The internet brings out the worst in people. I've had people who know me personally on the island say absolutely horrendous things about me
Really?
Online, because they're not having to face me when they say them. And this is a common problem with the internet in general, which is why it's so hard to get discussions going on there. Maybe it's just because I'm old school, but I find that getting together with people and talking, at least they have to remain civil, and that means occasionally they have to find some kind of argument to support what they're saying. But we are entering this age. I mean, this is something I've actually talked about. There's a wonderful quote by Isaac Asimov about we are now in an age of ignorance, where people think that their ignorance is as good as your qualification. And I would say we've gone beyond that to a point where ignorance is held to be higher than people's educations, qualifications. I mean, you can only see this in the discussions about vaccines and the discussion about climate change, for example, where they say, well, I don't know anything about climate change, but I reckon you're wrong.
Yeah.
Well, why didn't you find out something? Sure. And then we could...
Well, unknowingly, there was a demonstration in the Royal Square, or a meeting in the Royal Square. I didn't know anything about it. Freedom. Freedom was, I was, oh my God, I'd have listened to that, see what it is. And I was looking for somebody gave me an interview. And it was you spoke very well. And I put it up on that night, I put the film up on YouTube. And immediately had 1,000 hits. I've never had anything go straight into 1,000 hits. When I wake up the following day, it'd been removed. Google, whoever runs Facebook, whoever runs the thing, says, for community reasons, it's been deleted. In other words, it was contrary to government view. So that struck me. I thought, well, that is pretty serious, isn't it? What can I do about it? Nothing I can do about it. But they sliced it and it was gone.
And this is the hidden censorship that's going on at the moment that no one's talking about.
Yeah.
Where, the powers that be can decide whose voice is going to be heard, which is the very antithesis of what the internet is about.
Absolutely, it's totally. I was shocked. I had no idea. I mean, I've had a few things stop before. That's strange. Somebody's pressed the wrong button. Now I understand. They're controlling. They do control what we hear or see. So, big brother's out there.
And I don't really know an answer to that because the companies involved control so much of our media output. I mean, Google is just scary on its connections, and Mark Zuckerberg is now extending his media empire further and further. And what can you do?
Well, they know everything. They've got access to all the knowledge. I mean, when banks say, "Oh, we've got secrecy," I can't believe anybody's got secrecy, because if there's a computer, somebody's got access to it. I can't believe there's such a thing as secrecy anymore.
Well, I read a scary report about Google that it traces all kinds of things like passwords and other such things. It just doesn't publish them. Right. And I'm like, well, that's just fine, isn't it? But the point is, if they can pick this stuff up,
somebody else can.
Anyone else can.
Of course they can.
And this whole area of how can I put it? It's not democracy. It's freedom of expression that the internet was supposed to be about. Absolutely. Is now history.
That's right.
I mean, and God forbid that we talk about the effect of business on this and how they're spending more and more time trying to sell you things through it.
That's right. Indeed. We must have another discussion about Google another day. Thank you for your time.
A pleasure. Thank you.
I'm sorry you're not standing, but there you are.